Before we get started, I think I need to preface this by saying that I am not here to endorse Kanye West. I said the same thing about Bill Cosby, and before that the same thing about R. Kelly, and I'm saying it again because a lot of black folks get confused. We need to be honest about one thing when it comes to Kanye West. A lot of folks' hearts went pitter-pat, and they have romantic notions about the man because they still remember how way back in 2005 he said George Bush doesn't care about black people after Bush's deliberate refusal to act in the wake of the disaster of Hurricane Katrina. Now, while that was a fine moment, it was certainly great that he came straight up the middle and said publicly before the world what everyone was thinking but were too scared to say. The truth is, that was only a single moment, nothing more. And to give Kanye West any praise or adulation beyond that would be to make a saint out of a sinner. This is why I always tell you that we can't and won't go looking for black celebrities to support our agenda or to be die-hard black empowerment types. Yes, there have been a few, very few, who have given their open support, and that's great. But at the same time, we understand the reality of black people who are trying to make it in Hollywood. And that's fine, just so long as we understand what's going on. Now, what do I think about Kanye West and his latest debacle? Before we go any further, Kanye has said more than once that he's bipolar. Now, while that doesn't mean that he's howling at the moon crazy, it does mean that the man is not entirely responsible for himself. I didn't say that he is not responsible for himself at all. I said not entirely. Now, the white media, on the other hand, they're feeding his mania by making him the center of their circus. The chaos and intense distractions of the white media's headlines and paparazzi are noise that nobody needs. Personally, I think the white media, who are all too aware of the man's mental issues, would love to see if they could push him over the edge. One of the best ways to do that is to build someone up to the sky, make them famous all over the world, make them a household name, put them on all the headlines and news pieces for good things. And then, if their star fades, you just remind everybody now how famous they're not and how they're all washed up. Or if they have a scandal or two, you lead the charge to have everybody boycott them and erase them from all memory and talk about the rise and fall of fill in the blank. The white media giveth, and it taketh away. By covering you, the white media treats you like a big deal, and you can leverage fame for financial gain. Kim Kardashian wrote the book on that one. But what also goes unsaid is that if the white media decides to turn on you, just simply because they like to show everybody the car crash they're going to make out of your life, well, it leaves you with absolutely nothing and nowhere to turn. Everyone has a breaking point, and if that person's dealing with a mental illness, there's no telling what they might do to themselves or to others if they're put under enough pressure. The white media knows this, and they've got a PhD in putting people under pressure. Now, for my part, I don't follow celebrity or sports, so I'm sure that I'll have a number of people who are going to correct me on this or that factoid in the comment section. Please correct away. But in my estimation, I think the problems with Kanye West started after the sudden death of his mother in 2007. When she died, something in him was broken. She had been a more or less stabilizing force in his life. And I know how this will sound, but there's something that I think needs to be mentioned. Kanye West's mother was 58 years old. And she died during a cosmetic surgery procedure. That's how she died, in the cosmetic surgeon's office. Again, she was almost 60, but visiting the cosmetic surgeon for a tummy tuck and a breast lift. I mention that because that's also what Kim Kardashian's mother is known for too, her numerous cosmetic surgeries. It was after that Kanye took to doing public spectacles. In 2009, he showed up Taylor Swift, and regardless of whether that incident was staged or not, I actually think that there was probably a little bit of stage direction behind it. It doesn't change the fact that it was the first and what would become a trend. In 2014, he chose to jump on the Kim Kardashian media whore train, and that was pretty much the beginning of the end right there. The Kardashian family is a traveling circus, only instead of amusing the public, they specialize in shocking the public instead. Bruce Jenner, the husband of Kris Jenner, that's Kim Kardashian's mother, announced that he was a trans woman in 2015, and the very next year this trans woman spoke at the RNC convention, joking that she had gotten more trouble for coming out as a Republican than for being trans. Republicans attack trans people morning, noon, and night, and yet this person from a group who the Republicans attack regularly supports the Republican Party. Kind of the same way Kanye West went from saying George Bush doesn't care about black people to being BFFs with the most notoriously open racist president in American history. Do you notice a pattern forming yet? This is assimilation by association. And I don't know if we can entirely separate Kanye West's mental condition from this situation. One more thing. Kanye actually put his name on the presidential ballot in 2020 as another bit of attention whoring, but the very next year, Caitlyn Jenner tried and failed to run against Gavin Newsom during the California GOP's failed recall election. I say that to point out how this becomes a process that feeds on itself. Now, it is not true that Kanye's been on some non-stop string of attention-whoring stunts, as the white media would mislead you to believe, but he certainly hasn't helped himself with what has amounted to some new act of outrageous hyperbole every 6 months or so. And in the abstract at least, putting aside Kanye West's foolish behavior, and it is difficult to do, at the very least, Kanye West is actually famous for something. His music. That's how he came to prominence. Kim Kardashian, on the other hand, is exactly the opposite. She's the epitome of emptiness. She's famous for absolutely no reason at all. Even after all these years, I still don't know why that sex tape, which I think we all can admit was staged, made her famous in the first place. Was the guy who was in the sex tape famous or something? I don't know. I don't get it. I suppose that Kanye, after seeing Kim being lavished with easy praise and quick attention, and being able to turn that 15 minutes of fame into money, like her reality show and her perfume and her reality show, well, I guess he looked at how easily she was able to manage to milk her 15 minutes of fame for way longer than she had any right to, and I guess he thought to himself that he was working way too hard. I don't know the man. I did not and don't follow him closely, so I can't really say. I can only say what it looks like to me as an admittedly casual viewer. So why is it that he's being held up as such a unique figure of scorn all of a sudden? Because the white media has no other black men that they can demonize so readily at the moment. Kanye West is a sanctioned target. They failed to get Bill Cosby. They milked phony accusations against Michael Jackson for all that was worth, which wasn't much, and now that Sony has been allowed to get their hooks into the Jackson estate, they want to start making money off of him again, so they're going to lay off with the phony made-up smears, at least for now. But there are other people who are talking who really need to be quiet. I'm thinking about Ari Emanuel in particular, by the way. You'll recall that I told you about how Ari's talent agency, William Morris Endeavor, was one of the main financial backers of the so-called Time's Up organization. In fact, a number of the big talent agencies had a hand in funding that group, and the white media just couldn't get enough of covering Time Up's every word and hanging on their every utterance. Most of those utterances, however, were about Bill Cosby and other black men. But I also told you about how William Morris Endeavor was the same company that employed the now infamous Adam Bennett, who Terry Crews accused of groping him, and yet nobody cut ties with Ari Emanuel's company. No boycotts of WME, none of William Morris Endeavor's roster of A-list big money clients dropped them, none of their agents boycotted the company, nothing happened to them at all. WME's indiscretions fell down the memory hole because it was supposed to. And if Ari Emanuel is so hot and bothered about anti-Semitism, then I have to wonder why he hasn't been so vocal about the anti-Semitic remarks of Donald Trump. Ari Emanuel ain't had much to say about that at all, and we're talking about the most powerful man in Republican politics, who for a time was also the most powerful man in the world, and who has all but announced that he intends to run for president again in 2 years. Ari Emanuel's been real quiet about Trump. He hasn't been calling for all businesses to cut ties with Trump. Gee, I wonder why. Well, I suppose that Ari Emanuel doesn't really have any business dealings with Trump. He probably hasn't even had much contact with him at all, for that matter. Hell, the two of them have probably not even met. Okay, I can accept that, because if Ari Emanuel did know Trump and had met him on a number of occasions, then that would make Ari Emanuel the lowest, dirtiest kind of hypocrite to ignore Trump's blatant and long-standing anti-Semitism. And it would be even worse if Ari, say, had a family member who had worked to cover up a crime, like, say, a murder, like the time when his brother Rahm Emanuel was mayor of Chicago and covered up the murder of Laquan McDonald. I'd say covering up a murder is a lot worse than anything Kanye West could possibly say. Kanye West's words have not and cannot harm anyone. On the other hand, when you have a crooked mayor working to protect race soldiers who he knows are killing innocent people, now that is something deserving of nationwide outrage. It's certainly deserving of Ari Emanuel's outrage, but I guess he figures we're going to keep the phony outrage in the family. Also, Kanye West's remarks are not being attributed to him alone. They're also being attributed to the entire black community. This is yet another case of, if a black person does something, we're going to go ahead and say it's the whole black community's doing. Michael Bloomberg made all kinds of anti-black racist remarks when he was mayor of New York. During his time in office, he put laws in place specifically meant to target and harm black people, and he made it clear he thought that more black people needed to be affected by his racist laws. Yet nobody has tried to tie the Jewish community to Bloomberg. Nobody's used Bloomberg's long-standing record of anti-black racism as a way to claim that, well, all the Jewish American community hates black people. Nobody did that when Michael Richards went full racist on stage, spewing the N-word like he lost his mind. Sarah Silverman's made a career, such as it is, out of ridiculing black people, yet her anti-black antics are never attributed to anyone other than her. Same for Bill Maher. And Roseanne Barr's racist remarks were limited only to her. So if other groups never get amalgamated into one big anti-black racist whenever one member of that group does something, why is it that Kanye West is apparently the proof that black people as a group are anti-Semitic? Because that's how the white media is playing this. Now, the white media's feeble narrative is, well, he's influential, he's well-known and famous, and his fans love him, he's influential. Well, as the white media puts it, Kanye West's audience are primarily white teenagers. The white media claims that white kids are the primary consumers of rap music. So shouldn't we be looking at whether anti-Semitism in the white community has influenced Kanye West or not? Because as I see it, the media coverage regarding him is entirely racial. Can you imagine what the white media narrative would be if the racial roles were reversed? Say if we were talking about a white rapper like Eminem or Macklemore, and let's say that this hypothetical white rapper got into a relationship with a black woman who was only famous because she had a sex tape, and she was a free-range thought. And if that black woman's father announced that he was trans and then turned around and endorsed the GOP the next year, and they allowed all this to play out on their reality TV show, what would the white media narrative be? What would the white media narrative be if this hypothetical white rapper went on to confess that he was suffering from a mental illness? And if he went on to then say the things that Kanye West is accused of having said? The white media would be the main ones reminding us, well, he does have a mental disorder. This is what they do with all of these mass shooters. And they would also be focusing exclusively on the black thought and her family, and all the media coverage would be totally about her and her messed up family and how they drove this innocent, good white man to all of this bad behavior. They took advantage of him. They bedeviled him somehow, and how this black woman's family is an example of black dysfunction. That's what the white media frame would be. It would be entirely racial. No white media outlet has ever taken the Kardashian family circus and made that a racial issue. Instead, they play it as, this is just a sad commentary on media stardom. She's famous for nothing, but it's not racial, because they won't allow it to be. Justin Timberlake was the one responsible for Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction, but the white media made her the villain of the story. Now, if they did that to Janet Jackson, who was the one who got humiliated before the entire world, what do you think they can do with someone who has occasionally said an irresponsible remark or two? I'm going to push back against these white media narratives because I'm not about to be lectured by scumbags like Ari Emanuel. Ezra Miller assaulted a pregnant woman, and he's been accused of grooming a 12-year-old girl, accused by the girl's parents no less. What Bloomberg did are actions, not words. What Rahm Emanuel did are actions, not words. What Ezra Miller has done are actions, not words. If people want to crucify Kanye West, I don't particularly care because he's not for black empowerment, but when they try to use him as yet another clumsy launch pad to attack the black community as a group, then I am going to call that out. Because there has to be one standard and it must apply to everyone, even if the dominant society don't like it. If Kanye West should be boycotted and banned and dropped by the entire planet merely because of his words, then the condemnation and the punishment must be even greater for these other people's deeds. The people clutching their pearls and acting as if Kanye West runs around with a swastika tattoo, this obscene overreacting on their part smells like phony outrage. It smells like a media fantasy. All I have to do is look at some of the people who are fanning the flames the most, and I see the same MO that I saw with the artificial outrage campaigns against Bill Cosby and Michael Jackson. So that's my take on this whole media-generated fiasco, because while I don't support Kanye West, I don't support a double standard either, which is what this is. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Ikegus Dorset, Alvin McCoy, Cordelia Dudas, ACAB Devil, and Wesley Monroe. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.